So long as the Chargers do not overthink things, they are in position to make a young franchise quarterback extremely happy for the bulk of his career. Hi, I'm James the Faithful Angelino Sports with a special report. What the LA Chargers probably should do in the 2023 draft. And if you enjoy talking about the Bolts, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. We're talking LA Chargers football almost every day here. Now, as you know, if you follow the NFL draft at all, there is a ton of misinformation that gets bandied about in the days and hours prior to the draft. Team needs, who's looking at what. And for the Chargers, they are absolutely no exception because last year they were one of the most injury-prone teams in the NFL. And so because of that, you're hearing about things like, oh, they need to consider finding a replacement for J.C. Jackson, who may or may not be ready for training camp, or Nasir Adderley, the safety left. You'll hear a lot about the interior defensive line because the Chargers had trouble stopping the run. And for Pete's sake, what about running back Austin Ekeler, right? Because he has been given permission to seek a trade because he wants to get paid more. In the first round, or the first 3 rounds, I should say, I don't think any of that really matters. I think a lot of it is noise because you are looking at a franchise quarterback that you want to re-sign, and he's going to want to re-sign not just for the bag of money. He's going to want to re-sign if he is convinced that he has the tools around him to succeed, to move the ball down the field, score a lot of points, advance to the playoffs, and so on. You also, with the Chargers, have signed a new offensive coordinator from Dallas, and Kellen Moore, who absolutely looks at offense from a completely different perspective than fired offensive coordinator Joe Lombardi. These things play a distinct role in how the Chargers should approach particularly the first 2 or 3 rounds. Okay? So, what does that mean? Well, Moore loves to run double tight end formations. Chargers have 4 tight ends. None of them are elite run blockers. For that matter, I wouldn't even necessarily refer to them as elite pass catchers. That's an issue. That is one way the Chargers could definitely look at it. In addition to that, you could sit there and say, well, the wide receivers, they're starting to get up there in years. They're starting to get injured. The Chargers were down to their 4th and 5th wide receivers starting for them because of the number of injuries they had last year. In addition to that, the one deep threat that the Chargers had as a wide receiver, DeAndre Carter, left to sign with the Vegas Raiders. So they have route-running, sure-handed wide receivers, but no deep threats. All of that tells me where the Bolts are probably looking at pick 21. So, for example, you could definitely see them taking Jordan Addison of USC at pick 21 if he's available. But here's the issue with that. While nobody doubts Jordan Addison's hands, nobody doubts Jordan Addison's route running, nobody doubts he would fit as an inside slot receiver with the Chargers. Nobody doubts that. But his 40 was terrible at the combine. He's not necessarily a deep threat. So I don't necessarily see that. Same for Zay Flowers of Boston College, who gets a lot of play. If it were me, I would solve the tight end problem once and for all. If you're going to run a double tight end formation, I would tell the 4 that are already in the tight end room, you guys are in the running to be the second tight end, and we are going to either draft Michael Mayer of Notre Dame or Dalton Kincaid of Utah. Now, I would lean towards Kincaid. Everything I'm reading about the guy says he is NFL ready, and that he is a significantly better blocker than virtually any other tight end in the class. And he catches everything. Now Kincaid, and by the way, I've seen Mayer play live, and I've seen Kincaid play live. I don't have a problem with Dalton Kincaid, but he's also dealing with a back injury. So do you want to risk it? In my opinion, go for the sure thing. Solve the problem. Take Michael Mayer. Now, I do recognize that there are some people who are suggesting that the running back from Texas, Bijan Robinson, would be a good idea. And I can see that as being a way to kind of tweak Austin Ekeler. But, again, what we know about the Dallas Cowboys when Kellen Moore was their offensive coordinator was behind that big offensive line, behind that experienced offensive line, behind those 2 tight ends, virtually anybody could run. Ezekiel Elliott was once supposed to be a surefire Hall of Fame running back. He's not even their feature guy anymore because anybody can run in the Kellen Moore offense. So I would suggest to you that everything points towards tight end. And if by any chance a speed wide receiver falls who is elite, maybe the Chargers look there. But I would look at tight end first. That brings us to round 2. And now round 2 and round 3 now is where you start sitting there going, okay, we know we've done something that is going to help Moore and Herbert complete their offensive philosophy. Okay, maybe then you start looking at defense. I'm looking at a lot of names that are being bandied about that are very common in the second round. I've seen 2 edge rushers. I've seen Derek Hall of Auburn. Again, we talked about how injury prone the Chargers are. You're looking at, even though you as a Chargers fan, you may love Joey Bosa, you may love Khalil Mack, but you have to acknowledge that they are both injury prone. If either one of them went down last year, you had Kyle Van Noy to fill the slot, to fill the vacancy. You don't have Kyle Van Noy to fill the vacancy now. So if you lose Bosa or Mack, you now are really severely damaged in pass rushing. Derek Hall of Auburn has been bandied about. Isaiah Foskey of Notre Dame has been bandied about. In addition to that, you might look at cornerback or safety then. Cam Smith of South Carolina has been mentioned. Antonio Johnson of Texas A&M. If they go defense in the second round to try to plug those holes, which are not as pronounced as the one on offense, but if they look to defense in the second round, I can't really have a problem with that. I will add that Hall and Smith have been mentioned as targets for the LA Rams, just so you know. And so again, for the rest of the draft, now you're starting to sit there and go, okay, what are the remaining little priorities that the Chargers have? Well, we haven't mentioned wide receiver necessarily if they don't take Addison or Flowers in the first. If they don't take Addison or Flowers in the first, then you come back in the third round and theoretically take one. There's a lot of wide receivers that you could consider there. We were talking earlier about speed, about how the Chargers lack speed at wide receiver. It is possible that Trey Palmer of Nebraska could be available, as would be Tyler Scott. Those would be possibilities. Or maybe, let's assume for the sake of argument, that the Chargers didn't look to edge rusher in the second round. Maybe they looked to corner or safety. There may be an edge rusher available in the third. Tuli Tuipulotu of the USC Trojans might be available by then. So again, we're talking about not necessarily who I believe or who I predict they're going to draft. I'm talking to you about the tendencies of what the Chargers should look at. And then after that, rounds 4 through 7, then you start talking about, okay, how do we tweak Austin Eckler and get his replacement? Then you're looking about how do we fill in little holes in terms of depth in the offensive line. Then you're talking about things like filling in depth needs over at safety or in the defensive backfield. But again, the tendency or the pathway that I think the Chargers should go, first round, your priorities should be tight end and wide receiver. Most importantly, tight end. And have any of the 4 who are currently signed with the Chargers fight it out for that second starting spot. Round 2, you come back and you say, okay, let's look at defense. We need depth, either at edge rusher or defensive backfield. That's where I think they would look. Round 3, you say, okay, we got to look for a speed guy. Maybe he's not going to be the most elite wide receiver, but he can stretch the field. And then from then on out, you start filling your needs. You start filling your needs at running back. You start filling your needs at backup offensive linemen. You start filling your needs at backups for the defensive backfield. That would be a winning draft for the Chargers starting Thursday night. So you let me know what you think in the comments thread. Let me know if you believe that making Justin Herbert is or is not the priority for the Chargers starting tomorrow night. And if you enjoyed this conversation, don't forget to subscribe to Faithful Angelinos. We're talking LA Chargers sports here, LA Chargers football here almost every single day. Thank you for watching. I'm James. We'll be back tomorrow. Faithful Angelinos is a Corte El Queso production. Take care.